So it's just come to light that a card from Commander Legends might actually be hinting at a return to LORWYN. Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. We are here today to talk about a card from Commander Legends. Specifically, we're going to be talking about 3 visits. It's obviously up on the screen already. So this is 1 green and 1 for a sorcery that says, search your library for a forest card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. And the flavor text says, those who love the woods only wish to spread its majesty. Now, on the surface, this is a very straightforward card. We've actually had multiple cards that do this in Magic or something very similar. It's just normal ramp. I mean, admittedly, it does get non-basic forests, which makes it attractive. And another reason that it's attractive is up until now, this was a very hard to acquire card because it was originally printed in the portal sets, and the portal sets have like a fewer amount of cards printed. They have a smaller print run, and they're obviously as well pretty old. So the stuff can be pretty hard to get, especially Portal 3 Kingdoms, which I believe had the smallest print run overall. And so you find cards with insanely high price tags. But that's where this comes from. It's a pretty standard card, not too shabby at all. I mean, not for the standard format, but overall, it's a fairly serviceable card. It's nothing to get super excited about unless you particularly needed 3 visits. Let's say you're playing Commander or something like that, where you can only use 1 copy of the other ramp cards, then yeah, I could see that, right? Whatever. And it's neat too. But the flavor behind this is really cool. You've got 3 different fairies, and they are at some sort of like, it's probably a castle wall, I'm guessing. It looks, maybe it could also theoretically be like a village house or something like that. But they've got these magical vines growing up and just kind of opening the windows for them so that they can fly in. Now, for me, when I think of 3 visits, it obviously makes me think of like Christmas story time, where it's like, all right, you will be visited by 3 spirits. So the question here is, who are these visitors and what do they want? And once we start to ask that question, it becomes a lot more interesting, because the fairies that are depicted in this artwork actually come from multiple different locations and different sets in Magic's history. And it's very curious to see them here together. So starting with the fairy that's prominently put in the middle of the artwork here, that is the blue themed one, right? It's got these whitish blue kind of jagged looking wings, and it's got blue boots on, blue gauntlets, like a set of blue armor, right? And when you take a look at all that, you can actually break it down to being the card Quickling. Now, I want to actually take a moment and say, I located this information on Reddit. I'm not the one who figured out that 3 visits actually had fairies from different worlds. So that is posted on Reddit. You can check that out if you want to see the full thing there. But to me, it was interesting to begin with. But then when I realized that this actually could legitimately just hint towards LORWYN, I decided that this was going to be the subject of the video. So props for the discovery go to, I believe the name was Yodakin on Reddit. All right. So that being said, the artwork that is being depicted, the creature that's being depicted in the artwork, is the Quickling. That is a card from M15. That's 1 blue and 1 for a 2/2 flyer with flash, so you can cast it at instant speed. And when it enters the battlefield, sack it unless you return another creature you control to its owner's hand. So it's a weird kind of concept overall. Like, why do you have to return another creature? But whatever. I mean, it's a grizzly bear as a fairy. It's a 2/2, but look at its size, right? So to me, that speaks more of its martial prowess. I like these fairies because they clearly know how to use tools. They've like forged gauntlets for themselves and armor and all this kind of stuff, unless that's somehow grown into them. But to me, it feels like with the bindings that are there, it feels like it's like strapped on armor. And you can see that this one has some kind of magical looking lasso as well. That's not depicted in the original 3 Visits artwork, but in the Quickling artwork, it is. So this is like a tool using group. All the fairies have different kinds of tools, right? Some of them use scavenged items and some of them create their own. But either way, one of the fairies is visiting is a Quickling, and that's M15. Now, M15 is a core set, so it's not tied to any particular world automatically. So we don't 100% know where this Quickling comes from. But we do know that it doesn't come from LORWYN, because LORWYN has very, very distinctive style of insectile fairies, right? This is a different kind of vibe. They're two very different breeds of fairies. So when we return to looking at the 3 visits art, now we take a look at the fairy in the upper right hand corner, right? Now this is going to be a LORWYN fairy. It has pretty much identical patterning, but reversed. Or no, actually not even reversed, just identical patterning with some slight color changes. The Pestermite. If you take a look at Pestermite, you'll see that Pestermite has the exact same wing pattern, has the 4 wings specifically, where the Quickling one has 6 wings, right? You can see immediately there are differences. So you've got the wing patterns, which are identical. You've got the overall shape of the body, which is identical, right down to the long tiger stripe, like hornet stripe legs that end in those crazy insect pincher feet, right? So this is clearly the Pestermite, which is 1 blue and 2 for a 2/1 flash flyer. And when it comes into play, you may tap or untap target permanent. So these are some beefy fairies right here. And this one says, the Fae know when they're not wanted. That's precisely why they show up. The fairies of LORWYN are all servants of Una. And Una, like, LORWYN's a fascinating world, right? Where Una basically manipulates the entire plane so that it has almost, not exactly a never-ending day and night kind of thing. It's like, you know how in Alaska or in like extreme parts of the world, they will have crazy long nights, stuff like that. Well, on LORWYN, Una, the grand lord of all the fairies, she essentially orchestrated so that a day would last like 600 years, a night would last 600 years. These were all parts of her plan or whatever, but ultimately that all fell apart, and LORWYN is in a state that we don't actually know about now. We don't know what LORWYN looks like anymore. It would spend a bunch of time where it was its daytime happy mode and everyone was friendly and everything was all good, and then the nighttime mode where everyone was like, every man for themselves, and people were evil and whatever, and everybody's nature would change like that based on the magic of the aurora. Like, it was a really cool concept, but now LORWYN's kind of like a fresh slate, right? And we can go back to LORWYN now, whereas I thought we would never be able to go back to LORWYN before, because they had set up this philosophy where if the set doesn't sell well, we don't get to go back to that world, right? Doesn't matter how good the world is. Now, you've got Kamigawa back, which means, like, Kamigawa's coming back as Neon Dynasty, you can totally have LORWYN come back, right? So, who knows what it will be, but we can totally get LORWYN returning. It's a possibility now. Now, to return to the 3 visits card for a second, you may be asking who the 3rd fairy is. Now, there's nothing that really matches this fairy effectively. There's a half-ish match in the form of Cycle of Life, which is an enchantment that's 2 green and 1, and basic. It's really weird. You return it to your hand. Target creature you summoned this turn, that means cast this turn, it's old school language. Target creature that came into play this turn, or came onto the battlefield this turn, shows how old I am. Target creature that entered the battlefield this turn becomes a 0/1 until the beginning of your next upkeep. At the beginning of your next upkeep, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. This is a rare. You had to pay 3 mana and make your creature into a 0/1 to get 1/+1/+1 counter. Like, that's insane. This card is terrible, right? Just terrible. But in the artwork, if you take a look at the wings of the fairy in the bottom there, the wings kind of match her wings. They both have the same elongated ears and the hair color matches, but then the outfit that this fairy is wearing looks more like it's made out of vines and other like wildlife sort of things. So it doesn't fit there and it falls apart. And it's also not a creature card. Like, the Cycle of Life is so random and old that it really feels like a stretch, but it gives you a fit for the 3rd fairy if you want one. But overall, I like the idea of, like, Una controlled the fairies sprung from her. I like the idea of this 3 visits being somehow now some of LORWYN's fairies have survived the collapse of, like, what's happened on LORWYN. And perhaps like they've found a way. Maybe there's a way where these fairies, because of their purely magical nature, are actually able to travel through the blind eternities the same way that planeswalkers can. And so like these different fairies from different planes of existence are coming together to achieve a particular aim, whatever it is. You know what I mean? Or the idea that maybe there's a planeswalker out there who's going around and like creating an alliance of the Fae. Either way, that's a really cool concept. The idea of getting to go back to LORWYN would be really cool, right? Because you have all these awesome races on there. I loved the way they did the night and day thing, where the Kithkin in the daylight version, the 600 years of sunshine and daylight, the Kithkin were like happy little hobbit people, and they were able to share each other's thoughts and emotions, so they're really like tightly knitted together and just like a really nice community of folk. But then when you switch over to the nighttime version, then they are just these crazy, like their eyes like are glowing nutty because they live in perpetual darkness, and the way their minds are all connected turns them into a giant paranoid group that doesn't want to deal with outsiders in any way, which gets all crazy. And then you have like the Flamekin, who in the daylight version of the world are these like brightly flaming like fire elementals of goodness. And then in the night version, they're these like bitter, hate-filled cinders where they're just guttered out flames. There's barely any fire left in them. And once the fires go out, their existence ends, and they just want to like pillage and destroy. And it turns like goblins on their head, where in the nighttime version, you've got goblins that are like evil, but in the daytime version, you've got goblins that are just like silly little pranksters, like, I'm gonna come and take your pie, I'm gonna steal your goat tonight. Like, I love that. The flavor of LORWYN is so awesome. So, I mean, I get it. I get that I am like stretching towards this goal of returning to LORWYN. But, I mean, look at this artwork. You've got the Quickling, you've got the LORWYN fairy, like we have the unknown fairy. It could mean that. I mean, it could also be, for reference to yesterday's video, it could be artwork they had kicking around from the days of LORWYN and when they made the Quickling and some idea they had, and they just never used it. And this is some completely different card, right? I don't know. But the idea of it just being a little nod to, hey, you know what? Get excited, because we're going to bring LORWYN back at some point. It's totally possible now. Nothing is off the table in terms of world returns. And yeah, so the idea of just this like fairy congregation to achieve a goal is cool as a flavor concept. The idea of returning to LORWYN is exciting as a concept overall for me. I just wanted to share that. So let me know what you think about it, my friends, in the comments below. If you enjoy what I'm doing here, like the video, leave a comment, subscribe. It's all great for the channel. If you love what I'm doing, or even just like what I'm doing and want to help it grow, share the video around too. That's great. And yeah, other than that, thanks for coming by, my friends. I will see you all very soon.